Hey everyone, this is Ari Melber from MSNBC, and I'm joining you live on YouTube. I even see some people already posting comments on YouTube, so I see you guys. For example, someone said, "Where's Ari?" Good question. I'm right here. I appreciate you guys joining us. These are obviously tough times, difficult times for so many in America and around the world, but there are also times where, as we've been emphasizing in our broadcasts and our special coverage, where reporting and facts matter. Now, I'm going to give you guys something which is a little bit of a tour of my setup here, which is more than we would usually do on air. So you get something a little different or a little extra here. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're going to be trying these different things out right here on my Ari Melber MSNBC account, in addition to the MSNBC account. So what you see here is our setup in our studio. And if you look over here, we've got an eye on the White House briefing. We've got cameras, obviously, basically everything you could ask for in a newsroom. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing. Right now, you have the White House coronavirus briefing. As you probably know, if you're watching a live broadcast like this on our news account on YouTube, these are controversial briefings, and for good reason. The president has been caught lying and providing misinformation during them. And he's also at times, as we explained on air, turned them into something that is different from what they're supposed to be and what they were promised and advertised to be, which is a medical briefing. Just today, the president, for example, was describing some of the work that his administration's done, for example, in trying to get ventilators and testing, as a series of political clashes where people were trying to quote unquote get him or make him look bad in this time based on what he was or wasn't providing to the administration. So obviously the briefings are there. Many channels carry them as news, and you can watch them as news. They're on MSNBC. But right now, what we want to do is give you some extra additional information. Also, for those of you watching or wondering, this week, separate from The Beat, which usually airs at 6 p.m. Eastern, I'll be hosting in the 7 p.m. Eastern hour, give or take, after Brian Williams and after the briefing. Now, some of the updates we want to provide you factually. There are about 772,000 coronavirus cases now across the United States and 41,825 deaths. That is a death toll that's continued to rise. Last week, as many experts mentioned, was one of the worst weeks we've had. Now, what does that tell us? Well, a lot of the medical experts have explained that while the bad news rises, the question is always, as you've probably heard, about whether you're flattening the curve or not. Are you seeing bad information, negative information, bad news for anyone obviously affected by this, but are you seeing it? And you can hear in the background our newsroom studio here. That's how you know this is real. But as all of this rises up, the big question becomes, okay, are we getting to a place where those numbers reflect basically a lag of transmissions and health problems in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, or are you continuing to see it rise? In New York, for example, which has been the epicenter of this problem, we have had a situation where Governor Cuomo, who, by the way, is slated to talk to President Trump as soon as tomorrow in a meeting, where Governor Cuomo has basically said that as bad as it is, they see the death rate slowing. They think that these numbers reflect improvements, even though they're bad. That's one piece of this. The other piece is the WHO, which is something we've been reporting on. You've got a situation where it's almost unheard of, and we covered this at the time, but I want to use a little moment here with you guys to dig into it a little deeper. And you know what? I may go turn the volume down on this. Give me 1 sec. This is really live, so give me 1 sec.
Hey, Dennis, it's Darren. Hey, Darren. How you doing out there? Outstanding. Thank you very much for asking. How about yourself? Doing well. Can't complain. So, are you going to be... Great. All good?
You know, they say never leave a camera empty, but we are obviously making do with our staffing here in a more limited way. So I wanted to turn the background noise down. But one of the things that happened is it's kind of remarkable. WHO is basically an arm of the UN, and it deals with influenza-like pandemics, transmission, infectious disease. That's what it does. So it's pretty remarkable, and many experts say quite irresponsible, to have the President of the United States in the middle of a pandemic announce that he actually wants to defund and cut out the WHO. We talked to experts who say they've never seen anything like it. I also spoke to Professor Larry Gostin, an interesting guy, who is part of one of the CDC expert panels on, one of the WHO expert panels on infectious disease. And we asked him point blank, what does it mean? What is the consequence if the United States is not participating with, not supporting, and not funding the WHO at this time. And he said more people are going to die because of it, which was pretty stark. So I think we're going to continue to watch that issue play out. You know, one of the challenges with President Trump is, as Dave Chappelle famously put it when he was first elected, he's a troll. America elected a troll president. That's how Chappelle put it. And anyone who's familiar with Donald Trump's history as in reality television and entertainment, the way he uses Twitter, understands how much he does that. But whatever you think of that trolling or that effort to sort of distract and upset people, it's not just content. It's not just, shall we say, a tweet or a fight to pick when the president uses his power to say we're going to defund the pandemic. So the pandemic response internationally. So part of what we're trying to do as we report the news and as we do this on air and do it here in other forums is try to figure out, okay, if it's just noise, maybe you don't cover it. If it is actually consequential to whether people live or die, then of course you would cover it. You not only cover it, you might cover it with some accountability, with some criticism. And I think the WHO story fits in that category. Last week, the president made a lot of noise about, he sees himself as having universal authority over what state governments do. Well, you don't have to be an expert on your constitutional convention to know that's just not true. That's false. The Constitution provides this dual system, right, where states, governors have their own government. That's why there's literally state laws and crimes that you can be prosecuted for based on the state you're in, and the feds have no involvement. The federal government basically has no role to play. If you think about it in a criminal context, the president can't pardon state crimes. Now, he can go out on the White House lawn and give a speech and says he has quote unquote total authority. It doesn't mean anything. That was the story last week that we were following, where ultimately the president did back down and said, most of the reopening will be done at the state level with governors. But it was the kind of thing that I would argue in how we think about it was more noise than reality, precisely for the reason he doesn't have that power. WHO is one where if he does back down or the US decides to support international efforts against the pandemic more, that will make a big difference. And as many people have said, it's life or death. Here I am at this point in our reporting. Again, I want to be very transparent with you guys. We're trying new things. We're trying to live YouTube. We're trying to talk to folks to see what works and what doesn't. And we are open to your input and your comments, although be careful with the comment section. Sure, I could get roasted for all sorts of reasons, but I'm going to take a quick look before I go, since we said we would do this and we want to engage with all of you. And I'm going to look at some of the live chat comments and see if there's anything to mention. I have a question here. What about funds for the postal services? That's another area where we've seen basically a big question over whether this will be the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back. Does the Postal Service, which has had, to be clear, a lot of funding problems and problems with federal support in the Congress before this, does it run out of money completely? I think that's an open question. Looking through again at some of your other comments. Hello from Texas. What about Dr. Otto Yang's work, which could be a breakthrough on COVID-19? That's a great question, and I will admit sometimes we're keeping track with all of these developments and negative kind of sad information, to be sure. There's a lot of work going on here around the country, not just on the front lines of trying to help people, but also trying to have a race for a cure. We got to interview someone who volunteered and basically was a test subject for a potential vaccine. Earlier today, when I was on air, we interviewed a doctor who was working on 4 different potential treatments, some of which they believe if they were to work, and there's that whole process, it could change the entire way we deal with this virus, where there was an actual treatment that would prevent a lot of the complications, meaning this would no longer be something that carried the risk of a terminal outcome for people in the at-risk categories. One of the features of that the doctor was explaining to us was, if it works, something that would protect the lungs from being as harmed by COVID-19, even if you did contract it. So that's another area where there's certainly, from what we're hearing in the interviews we're doing, there's certainly some glimmers of hope. I'm going to keep looking at some of your guys' comments. Welcome, DJ Ari. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Waiting in Ann Arbor, place I used to live when I went to college. Shout out to Ann Arbor. Hope you guys are doing all right. Just checking into your other comments here on YouTube. Thanks for doing this. Happy to do it. It's working for Mary Catton. Hi, Mary. Great. Oh, here's a question. Does Congress have the authority, any authority to prevent Donald Trump from cutting off the WHO funds? That's a great question. I mean, this is one of those times where we're seeing a lot of the issues in our society and in our government played out on kind of this big emergency stage, if you want to call it that, or big emergency context. So on the one hand, we've seen Congress move faster than usual, free up a lot of money, try to put it out into the system, which is a reminder that the months that go by where nobody ever works together is a choice, because when something bad enough happens, clearly there is an ability to get things done quickly. As for the funding question about what the president was doing, he was trying to use his authority as president over current funds. And there is what is called some types of executive authority over the administration of funds. In fact, internationally, any president, whether you like this one or not, tends to have a little more leeway on that. That is to say, funds that are appropriated by Congress, which are generally then have to be spent a certain way, and there's law on that. But most of those types of bills will be passed with language about how the president or cabinet secretaries can withhold or alter funds that are going abroad for various reasons. In the future, though, I think to get at the heart of the question, if this Congress or any Congress wants to provide funds that don't have that wiggle room, or that automatically go with no ability for the president or agency heads to interfere, that go to the WHO or elsewhere, they could do that. And again, the point here is not to state that any international organization is somehow perfect and should get money with no strings attached. The UN, WHO, World Bank, I mean, these are complex institutions. They get criticized from all sides for all sorts of reasons. It was the notion of cutting off all the funding in the middle of fighting this that seemed so onerous, combined with the fact that the president didn't make any secret of the fact that he was looking for someone to blame, because as we reported in our fact check that day, he literally went out to the White House Rose Garden and accused the WHO of taking China's word, being, quote, China-centric early on in this crisis and not taking it seriously. We showed that, in fact, in late January, the WHO, far more than the Trump administration, was warning different countries about how to contain the spread of the virus. President at the time was tweeting, basically praising China's leader and saying everything would work out. Now, that doesn't mean WHO was perfect. Again, you can point to a bunch of things, including at the early stages when there was confusion about what they were dealing with, what this new virus was, where they made mistakes. Look, I don't want to go on too long. That's what TV is for, right? But I do want to tell you all that we're going to continue to experiment with these kind of things. So again, if you're here watching, please subscribe to the Ari Melber MSNBC YouTube page. Please obviously subscribe to the MSNBC page if you haven't already, and continue to leave comments here. We, my team, myself, will check back and see what people are interested in and see if there are ways that we can provide real-time information on YouTube if it is helpful. And as always, we'll remind everyone, no matter where you're watching, whether it's in the United States or around the world, to, of course, please stay safe. If you're in a place with a shelter at home, please try to do that. Wash your hands. Use a mask if you're in public closer than 6 feet to other people. Follow all these guidelines that we've gotten. We have enough information now to know that they really do work in combating the spread of this tough disease. Thanks to everyone. We'll see you next time.